I love you both, but I will not continue to enable this behavior. You are cut off.
The phone kept buzzing on my kitchen table like it had a mind of its own. Buzz, stop, buzz again. I didn't touch it. For the first time in years, I just stood there barefoot on cold tile, coffee going untouched, watching the screen light up and go dark again. Same name, same boy I gave birth to 40 years ago, same urgency in every missed call, and for the first time I felt calm, not relieved, not happy. Calm, that calm scared me more than the anger ever did. I'm a black woman raised to believe you hold your family together no matter what. You pray, you sacrifice, you stretch a dollar until it cries, and you never let your child fall. That's what my mama taught me. That's what her mama taught her. But standing there in my quiet kitchen, listening to my phone vibrate itself tired, something inside me whispered a truth I'd been running from. Maybe holding everyone together is what's been tearing me apart. The calls finally stopped, for exactly 12 seconds, then the text started. Mom, please answer, this is serious. I picked up the phone, flipped it face down, and slid it under a stack of unpaid mail I hadn't opened in weeks. Bills I could pay, bills I always paid, bills nobody ever thanked me for. Outside, the morning sun hit the window just right, lighting up the dust in the air. Same kitchen, same table, same life, but something had shifted. The night before, I hadn't slept. Not because of worry, because of clarity, the kind that shows up late, uninvited, and refuses to leave. I'd replayed a moment over and over in my head, not dramatic, not loud, just careless. Words spoken too easily, laughter that cut too deep. It happened in my own house. That's the part that still stings. You expect the world to disrespect you sometimes. You don't expect it from people who eat your food, use your money, and sit on your couch like it belongs to them. Around 2 a.m., I'd gotten up, wrapped a sweater around my shoulders, and sat right where I was standing now. Same chair, same view, same silence. And that's when I made a decision I never thought I'd have the strength to make. Not out of revenge, not out of cruelty, out of self-respect. The phone buzzed again under the mail stack, muffled but persistent, like a conscience that didn't want to be ignored. I finally picked it up, not to answer. Just to read the last message that came through. We're stuck. Nothing's working, people are staring. What did you do? I exhaled slowly, closed my eyes, and whispered to the empty kitchen. I chose myself? And somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. People like to say it happens slowly. That one day you wake up and realize you've been used. That's not true, you know, long before you admit it. I knew the first time my savings account dipped lower than it should have. I knew when my fridge was full of leftovers I didn't feel like eating, while my card paid for steak dinners I never tasted. I knew every time someone said, "You don't need much anyway, mama," but knowing something and accepting it are two very different things. After my husband passed, the house got quieter, but the demands got louder. That's when it started. Small at first, a light bill here, a temporary loan there, always followed by the same soft promise, just this once. I believed it every time because I was lonely, because I was grieving. Because being needed felt better than being alone. My son said life was hard, his partner said prices were crazy, rent went up, work was stressful, everyone else seemed to be doing better than them. And somehow, their stress became my responsibility. I told myself it was what good mothers do, that sacrifice was love, that love was measured by how much you were willing to give up without complaining, so I gave. I gave when my back hurt and my hands shook from arthritis. I gave when my retirement check barely stretched to the end of the month. I gave while telling myself I didn't need much anyway. What I didn't realize was how comfortable they'd gotten reaching into my life without asking. At some point, they stopped coming to visit me, they came to visit solutions. They talked about trips, cars, restaurants, always around me, never with me. I became background noise in my own home. And the worst part, I let it happen. Because every time I tried to speak up, guilt wrapped itself around my throat. They're young, they're still figuring things out, you're the parent. I kept thinking one day they'd notice. One day they'd say thank you in a way that felt real. One day they'd stop needing so much, but need turned into expectation. Expectation turned into entitlement. And entitlement turned into laughter. That moment from yesterday, the one that cracked something open in me, it wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel on purpose. That's what made it worse. It was easy, casual. Comfortable, like disrespect had lived in my house for years and finally felt safe enough to speak out loud. When I think back now, I don't remember the exact words as much as I remember the feeling. Standing there, dishwater cooling around my fingers, realizing I wasn't seen as a mother anymore. I was a resource, a quiet one, a reliable one, a disposable one. The phone buzzed again on the table. I didn't answer. Because once you see the truth clearly, you can't unsee it. And I wasn't ready to tell them yet what that truth had cost me. There's a strange thing about being taken for granted. You don't disappear all at once. You fade. Your opinions get skipped. Your presence becomes optional. Your feelings turn into inconveniences. That night before the phone calls started, I wasn't trying to listen in on anyone. I was just moving through my own house the way I always did, quiet, careful, making myself small without even realizing it. They were sitting at the table, laughing, comfortable, safe, and that's when it happened, not shouted, not whispered. Spoken the way people talk when they assume no one important is listening. A joke, at least that's what they would call it later. I remember freezing mid-step, dish towel in my hands, heart pounding like it had just realized something my mind had been avoiding for years. My name wasn't said, but I didn't need it to be. I was the subject, the punchline, and the sound that hurt the most wasn't the words, it was the laughter that followed, my son's laughter. The same laugh he had as a little boy when I tickled him on Sunday mornings. The same laugh I stayed up nights listening for when he was late coming home as a teenager. That laugh didn't sound the same anymore. It sounded careless. That's when I knew something had shifted beyond repair. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. I just stood there long enough to feel the truth settle into my bones. They didn't feel bad because they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. To them, I wasn't a person with limits. I was a guarantee, and guarantees don't need gratitude. I finished washing the dishes, dried my hands, walked past them without a word, went to my room and closed the door softly, so softly they didn't even notice. That was the moment I stopped being invisible to myself. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the wall. Not angry, not heartbroken, clear. Painful clarity has a sound to it. It's quiet. It doesn't rush. It waits until you're ready to hear it. I realized something then that made my chest tighten. They weren't cruel people. They were comfortable people, comfortable enough to forget where their comfort came from, comfortable enough to assume I'd always be there, fixing things, smoothing things over, paying for the mess without asking questions. And I had taught them that. That's the part nobody wants to talk about. Sometimes the people who take advantage of you didn't invent the system, they just learned how it worked. Around midnight, I stood up, walked into the living room, and looked around like I was seeing it for the first time. My furniture, my walls, my life, yet somehow none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. That's when the question finally formed in my mind, the one that scared me the most. What happens if I stop? I didn't know the answer yet. But I knew one thing for sure. By morning, everything was going to change. At 2 a.m, the house sounded different. No voices, no laughter, no expectations hanging in the air. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock that had been counting my silence for years. I wrapped my robe tight around me and walked into the living room like I was visiting someone else's home. Every step felt deliberate. Heavy, honest. I sat down at the old desk my husband once used for bills and letters, the one place in the house that still felt grounded in truth. I turned on the lamp and its yellow light spread across stacks of paper I hadn't looked at closely in a long time. Bank statements, credit card letters, account numbers written in my handwriting. My name was on everything, but none of it felt like mine anymore. That's when I understood something that hit harder than the insult ever could. I wasn't being robbed in secret. I was handing everything over with a smile. My fingers hovered over the phone for a long time before I finally picked it up. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt steady. I started making calls, not emotional ones, practical ones. I spoke calmly, clearly, like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Cards were paused, shared access removed, automatic payments canceled, passwords changed. Each confirmation felt like a quiet door closing. No drama, no speeches, just boundaries being built brick by brick. By the time the clock said 5 a.m., the sky outside was starting to lighten. Birds were waking up, unaware that a lifetime pattern had just ended inside a small, silent house. I made myself tea, not the rushed kind I usually drank between errands and favors, but slow, intentional hands wrapped around the warmth like I deserved it. I sat by the window and waited. I knew what would come next. Panic, confusion, anger, because when people are used to unlimited access, boundaries feel like betrayal. I didn't feel guilty. That surprised me. I thought guilt would come crashing down like it always had, but it didn't. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar and powerful: control. For the first time in years, my life was quiet, not because I was alone, but because I wasn't being pulled in 10 different directions by other people's wants. When the phone finally rang, I didn't jump, I didn't rush, I let it ring. I watched the name flash on the screen, and instead of dread, I felt clarity sharpen inside me. This wasn't about money anymore, this was about respect. And whether they were ready or not, they were about to learn what it felt like when the safety net disappeared. I took one slow sip of tea, inhaled deeply, and finally answered. "Good morning," I said. My voice didn't shake. And that's when the real storm began. His voice came through the phone, sharp and breathless, like someone running downhill with no brakes. "What did you do?" No hello, no concern, just accusation. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the steam curling up from my mug. The sound of his panic didn't rush me the way it used to. It landed and stopped. "I made a decision," I said calmly. There was noise on his end, voices. The clink of silverware, a waiter clearing a table, somewhere fancy, of course it was. "You can't just do that," he snapped. "None of the cards are working, we're in public, people are staring." That word again, people, not you, hurt me. Not what happened last night, just embarrassment. I closed my eyes for a second, not to escape but to stay steady. "For years," I said slowly, "I worried about how you looked, how you felt, what people thought of you. Today, you're going to worry about it yourself." There was a pause, a long one. "You're acting strange," he said finally. "This isn't like you." And that's when it hit me, clear as daylight. He didn't recognize the woman on the phone because he had never met her before. The version of me he knew was quiet, predictable, always available, always fixing things behind the scenes so he never had to feel discomfort. This woman. She was new. "You laughed," I said softly. "Yesterday when I was being talked about like I wasn't even in the room." "That wasn't," he started. "Don't," I cut in, not loud, just firm. "Don't explain it away." I heard what I heard. And I finally understood what it meant. The noise in the background got louder. I could imagine the scene without seeing it. The checking of pockets, the forced smiles, the silent calculation of who else might rescue them. "Just turn them back on," he said. "Just for today, we'll talk later." Later, that word had cost me years. "No," I said, "later never comes. Later is how this kept going." "You're being cruel," he snapped. "You're my mother," I nodded to myself, even though he couldn't see it. "And because I'm your mother," I replied, "I should have taught you a long time ago how to stand on your own. I failed at that. Today I'm correcting it." Silence. Not the thoughtful kind, the stunned kind. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped. "Do you know how this makes us look?" There it was, not "how do you feel," not "are you okay," just "how do we look?" "That," I said quietly, "is no longer my problem." I hung up before he could respond. My hands shook a little afterward, but not from fear, from release. Outside, the sun was fully up now. Light filled the room, touching corners that had been dim for too long. I didn't know what they would do next. I only knew this: the safety net was gone, and for the first time in years, I wasn't falling. The quiet didn't last. It never does when people realize the door they've been walking through freely has been locked. About 2 hours after that call, I heard tires crunch against the gravel in my driveway. One car, then another. Doors slammed hard enough to make the windows tremble. I didn't move. I stayed right where I was, seated near the back window, sunlight warming my shoulders, tea long gone cold. The knocking came fast and angry. "Open the door." That wasn't a request, that was a command. I recognized the rhythm of it, fists hitting wood like they were owed an answer, like the house itself was disobedient. I stayed still. The knocking turned into pounding. "Mom, we know you're in there," I smiled sadly to myself. Of course they knew, they'd always known where to find me. I was reliable like that, always home, always waiting, until now. "You're being ridiculous," a woman's voice snapped. Sharp. Entitled, the same voice that had laughed the night before. I closed my eyes and breathed. They weren't angry because they were hurt. They were angry because control had slipped out of their hands. The door rattled again, harder this time. My heart thumped once, heavy, but it didn't race. I wasn't scared of them. I was scared of the old version of me that would have rushed to open that door, apologizing for making grown people uncomfortable. That woman stayed seated. The shouting grew louder, accusations flew like stones. You embarrassed us, you're acting crazy, you owe us an explanation. I almost laughed at that last one. Owed for years they had taken without explanation, without permission, without gratitude. But the moment I stopped giving, suddenly I was the one who needed to explain myself. Minutes passed, then more, their anger shifted tones, rage melting into desperation. I could hear it in the pauses between words, in the way the pounding slowed. They were running out of options. That's when the voice changed. Soft, sweet, careful. Please, she called through the door, let's just talk. You don't have to do this. I stood up slowly and walked toward the window, not the door. I pulled the curtain back just enough for her to see me. Her face changed instantly. Relief first, then calculation. There you are, she said, smiling too fast. Continue and ninth part of end of story. There you are, she said, smiling like we were old friends who just had a misunderstanding. That smile, I'd seen it 1,000 times before. The one she wore when she wanted something, soft eyes, tilted head, voice dipped just enough to sound reasonable. For a second, just 1 second, the old instinct rose up in me. Open the door, fix it, keep the peace. I hated how natural that instinct still felt. I looked at her through the glass, really looked this time, the impatience hidden behind her eyes, the way her fingers tapped her arm, already annoyed that the smile hadn't worked instantly. I shook my head slowly, her smile dropped. What are you doing? She snapped, volume rising. This is childish, come on, open the door. I closed the curtain, the pounding exploded again, harder, angrier, kicks this time. Not caring that the door was old, not caring that it had been built by the man I loved, that's when it hit me. They weren't here to understand, they were here to win. Mom, my son yelled, his voice cracked but there was frustration under it. This is getting out of hand, you're forcing us into a corner. Forcing them. I sat back down, heart heavy but steady. The truth was settling into place like a final piece of a puzzle I'd been pretending not to see for years. When people benefit from your silence, they panic when you find your voice. After almost an hour, the noise faded, doors slammed, engines roared, gravel scattered as they sped away. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. But it was a clean emptiness, like a room after everything unnecessary has been cleared out. That evening, my phone rang again, different numbers, familiar voices, suddenly concerned, family, friends, people who hadn't called in years. They all wanted to know what was wrong with me. That's when I realized something important. The story had already been rewritten, and I wasn't the hero in it. By the next morning, I was officially the problem. Concern dressed up like judgment came pouring in. People asked about my health, my state of mind, whether I was confused or going through something. Funny how boundaries make people question your sanity. I listened quietly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Because the truth didn't need defending. Late that afternoon, a woman from the neighborhood came by, someone who'd watched everything from a distance for years. She sat with me, listened, really listened. And then she said something that changed how I saw everything. You know, she said gently, from the outside, this has always looked one-sided. That sentence hit harder than any accusation. From the outside, people had seen it. They just hadn't said anything, and I hadn't asked. That night, alone in my house, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked forward, not to fixing anything, not to apologizing, to living. I made plans, small ones. Personal ones, the kind that don't require permission. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what I might lose. I felt curious about what I might gain. Weeks passed and the world didn't end. That surprised me the most. After all the shouting, the accusations, the worried phone calls disguised as concern, I expected silence to feel heavy. Punishing, lonely, but it didn't. It felt honest. The house stayed quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of not being needed for the wrong reasons. In the beginning, my phone stayed face down on the table out of habit. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Every buzz still made my chest tighten a little, not with fear but memory. Then something unexpected happened. The calls slowed. Not because they didn't need help anymore, but because they were finally learning how to solve their own problems. I heard through other people that they'd moved. Smaller place, different area, not the kind of place they'd brag about online. No fancy dinners, no weekend trips, just real life. At first, that knowledge made me sad, not because I missed paying for it, but because I realized how long they'd been pretending. how long I'd helped them pretend. One afternoon, I stood in my kitchen cooking a simple meal and realized something that stopped me mid-stir. I wasn't rushing, no anxiety about the cost of groceries. No mental math about whether I'd need that money later for someone else's emergency. No guilt for enjoying something small, just me, my food, my time. I sat down and ate slowly, really tasting it. That's when the tears came, not sharp ones, but quiet, surprised ones, not grief, relief. I thought about all the years I'd mistaken sacrifice for love, how I'd believed being a good mother meant being endlessly available, endlessly giving, endlessly tired. Nobody tells you that you can love your child deeply and still say no. Nobody tells you that boundaries don't make you cold, they make you whole. One evening, my son called, not panicked, not angry, just unsure. He asked how I was doing, and for the first time I believed he actually wanted to know. We talked about ordinary things, weather, work, a recipe I'd tried, nothing about money, nothing about favors. When we hung up, I sat there holding the phone, realizing something important. This was the relationship I'd wanted all along, not one built on transactions, not one balanced on guilt, just connection. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't warm all the time, but it was real. I started doing things for myself without explaining them to anyone. Morning walks, new books, sitting on the porch just to feel the air change. I stopped apologizing for resting. And slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, I stopped feeling responsible for other adults' happiness. That weight I'd carried for years, it didn't fall off all at once. It loosened, then slipped, then disappeared. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, if I regret saying no, if I regret changing, if I regret choosing myself so late in life. I always give them the same answer. I don't regret the love. I regret the silence, because love should never require you to disappear. And now when the house is quiet, it doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. It feels like peace that came at a cost but stayed because it was worth it. And that's how my story ends. Not with applause, not with forgiveness speeches, but with a woman sitting in her own home, finally at ease, knowing that choosing herself wasn't the end of her family, it was the beginning of her life. If this story made you pause, if it stirred something quiet inside you, if you've ever given so much that you forgot where you ended, then this story wasn't just entertainment. It was a mirror. Some lessons don't arrive loud. They come softly after the damage is done. If you're still here, it means you're strong enough to hear the truth. Backhand index pointing right, tap subscribe if you believe love should never cost you your dignity. Backhand index pointing right, like this video if you've ever been taken for granted by the people you love most. Backhand index pointing right, share this story with someone who keeps saying just one more time and needs to hear it's okay to stop. And tell me in the comments, at what point does love become self-betrayal? Because sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is finally choose herself.